Story 1. A childhood friend of mine had this boyfriend that nobody liked. She ran off and he eloped with him. He cheated on her a bunch of times and there was constant drama. My wife worked with her and we were some of her few childhood friends still in the area, so we were pretty close. Like, she'd come over and spend the night on our couch occasionally and stuff. An obviously unhealthy and likely abusive marriage. He seemed to mellow out when they had kids. At least, there wasn't any more overt drama going on, and we think he legitimately stopped cheating. He also got really religious. Something about this creeped my wife and me out and made us hate being around him even more than before. It's like when someone's pretending they're happy, and you know it's not real. Like all the overt anger and drama transformed into something more subtle. On the surface, he turned over a new leaf and is becoming a better person. But it just seems off in a way that we can't quite articulate. We tried to be happy for them and supportive, but once they weren't around, it was like, holy shit, did you get the same creepy feeling from him that I did? Then one day, he murdered her. Their kids were at a friend's house at the time, so they were fine, but there was evidence that he'd been planning this for over a year. He's in prison for life now. We learned not to ignore any red flags or intuitive creeped out feelings about people after this. Especially about people married to someone we care about. Story 2. It's a sad fact, but when I was growing up, there was a time when kidnappings were happening constantly in my home country. I encountered one of the kidnappings at 6 years old who, true to the stereotype, offered me candy. Lucky for me, the only candy that has ever and can ever entice me is Twizzlers. Lucky for me, he only had Nerds and Starburst. I ran off and told him no thanks. He picked up another boy that night. He raped and killed him. If he'd had fucking Twizzlers, I'd have paused for at least more than 15 seconds for him to close the distance. Would I have gone with him for a box? I don't know. Do I question my folks letting me walk home at 6? Kind of. But it was 5 minutes from school and things were hard. I think about it all the time. That poor kid who probably liked Starburst. Story 3. It was 1989, and my dad was driving down the road late at night. He lived in Florida at the time. As he was driving, he saw a woman on the side of the road trying to hitchhike. My dad, being kind-hearted, slowed down to give her a ride. As he slowed down, he had a chill down his spine and had the worst feeling he ever felt. He did not pick up that woman. That woman was named Eileen Wuornos. She killed a man on that road later in the day. My little brother exists today because my dad chose to not pick that woman up. Story 4. The person in question didn't murder anybody, but he definitely came close to it. The person is the man I spent 10 years of my childhood living with, my stepfather. He was abusive towards me since the beginning, covering up his abuse by saying it was discipline. This included verbal abuse, slapping, and kicking. If he left a mark, he'd say I hurt myself and he had nothing to do with it. After a few years, the abuse started getting worse. Once, he slammed my head against the table, which gave me a black eye. Another time, he broke a wooden spoon on me. When I was 14, my mom had been in an unending argument with him for 2 years and had finally made the decision to leave him. She did it once before, but he pulled her back in, despite my objections. This time, however, she decided to tell him beforehand. After he heard this, he took away everything important to us and demanded she give him the car keys. Mom refused, so for the first and last time, he turned his hand on my mom. 10 minutes later, he had left a minute before the police showed up. As soon as he started hitting, I grabbed the phone and snuck away to call the police. And by the end of it, he slammed her head against the hardwood floor, broke 2 ribs, and collapsed a lung. She very well could have died that day, and had it not been for all the trauma he had caused me, I could very well have followed my instinct to turn a knife against him. In the end, the police arrested him hours later when he returned from playing poker with his friends. He was charged $3,000 and put on 12 months good behavior bond. We found out after the trial that he had been charged with domestic violence before and had been charged $5,000 on that trial. At this point, I'd give anything to meet him in a dark alleyway and see how well he can fight when his opponent can defend himself. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I live in downtown LA. Me and a few of my friends went to a club, and to be honest, I got pretty drunk. My friends offered to call me a cab or even walk me to my apartment, but I refused. I've been drunk a few times before and walked home just fine every time with no incident. Until this night, I hadn't even thought about what might happen to a drunk 22-year-old girl in LA. My apartment was about a 15-minute walk from where the club we were at. When I was about 10 minutes away, I began to notice a man following me. Every turn I took, he was right behind me. I didn't recognize him and began to write it off as a coincidence when I had an idea. I went into a nearby store to act like I was looking around, and that's when I knew something was off about him. He stopped at the entrance of the store and acted like he was waiting on someone that never came. This was too much of a coincidence. Looking back, I should have called the police, but they couldn't have done anything yet since he hasn't caused any harm. So instead, I walked around the store for a few minutes and eventually walked out and began to walk the rest of the way home. To be honest, I half expected them to try and do something to me when I walked out, but luckily, there was a group of people walking by, and I tried to join in with them, but they took a wrong turn from my apartment, so that was impossible. As I was walking, I noticed he kept getting closer to me. When I walked faster, he would too. I was about 5 minutes away. I started running. He did too. I could see him clearly now that he was close. He was tall, about 6 feet, with blonde hair, and I think green eyes. One thing stuck out to me, though. It was a scar. It was a long scar that ran across his face and went over one of his eyes. It looked like he'd been cut with a long knife. I ran faster now. I could see the hotel where my apartment was now. I ran faster and faster until I was through the front doors. I burst through them, panting and out of breath. I turned around to see if the man was going to follow me, but he didn't. He was just standing there. I saw the doors, just standing and watching. A couple minutes passed, and he went on his way down the street. Quickly made my way to the elevators and took it to the 3rd floor where my apartment was. I locked the doors, took a shower, and tried to lay down and go to sleep. But I couldn't. I kept on seeing that man's face in my head. A few days later, I kind of forgot about the incident until I saw the man again. Only this time, it was in our local newspaper. It said that he was a suspect in the murders of 2 women who had been strangled. This fact terrified me. The man who was following me was a murderer. He was going after me. I would have been his 3rd victim. I feel bad for the families of the people who were murdered, and I'm glad the son of a bitch is in prison now, so nobody else can get hurt.